This is USCHO Weekend Review. And here is your host, Ed Trefzger.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. And gentlemen, before we dive in, we haven't talked together since the Frozen Four. We got some quick thoughts on video right after the game finished with Western Michigan's championship. Looking back on that, what really stands out to you from the Frozen Four in St. Louis?
Yeah, I think Western Michigan maybe was a team that was overlooked at the start of the season, but as the season played on and that team gained more experience and kind of chalked up the wins, went on some runs and went on some really good winning streaks. I think they only had one regulation loss after New Year's, which is really impressive. They just were playing really good hockey, and they played like a championship team. You hear teams that are built for the postseason. It appeared that Western Michigan felt like they mentally and on the ice, on paper, they were built for this postseason.
And they found ways to win close, tight games. 2 overtime games in the first round and then the semifinals. And then they had in the NCHC, they had to go to overtime to win the NCHC championship. So obviously, Coach Brecky and myself were really happy right after the Frozen Four with our Western alums. And really, quite honestly, everybody keeps telling me congratulations. I didn't do anything. I did it in 1990, but really proud of their program and proud of the job that Western did. And to be able to have that in my hometown and have my alma mater win was pretty cool. But Western was the best team. I think we said it going into the tournament that they were the best team, and the best team won going into the whole thing.
Okay. Can we just take a step back too and realize that this is yet another national championship for the NCHC? I mean, that wall out in Colorado Springs where they list them all, they haven't been around very long. They're going to need another wall. This conference is just finding ways to win in the right time of the year. It's impressive.
I saw a short clip of an interview that Broncos head coach Pat Ferschweiler did with the Hockey Think Tank podcast, talking about coaching. And something that stood out to me in that is that he said at the beginning of the season, they sat with each player and talked to them about what they thought they were capable of, and then left it in the hands of their peers to try to push the guys to that level. What I think stood out for me looking at it at the end of the season is how many guys on that team made huge leaps from the previous season.
You hope, oh gosh, you hope that's how it goes, especially as you get older, especially as you get go from a freshman year to a sophomore year, a junior to a senior. And like you said, Jimmy, a lot of guys made some big jumps. And they plugged holes too. They had a lot of transfers, and they came together. Sometimes as many transfers as they had doesn't work out. In this case, their formula worked out and their culture worked out perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I had it when we were out at the Frozen Four. They had multiple players go from single-digit points, not just like double their point total, like go from 7 to 14. We're talking like 7 to like mid-30s in points. That's a huge step. You almost, as a head coach, Derek, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you hope things like that are happening, but you can't count on that. Those are massive jumps that you don't typically see. That's almost to a level of extreme, but it certainly was something that paid dividends.
Yeah, and those are things that you look at and you go, okay, you had 10 points, you hope to get 20. You wouldn't like going to 30 and going from 7 to 30. And like Daniel Levins for us, when we went to our first NCAA tournament, he had 2 points, 1 goal, 1 assist. Next year he had 40 points. You don't see that very often anymore. And to be able to do that, the amount of players, like you said, Jimmy, that did that for Western, that's why they're national champions.
We'll talk a little bit more about Pat Ferschweiler and also David Carl, the coaches who were considered for NHL jobs a little bit later on in the podcast. But let's get to the coaches convention, the American Hockey Coaches Association convention every May in Bonita Springs, Florida. Derek, you were at that too, and there was a lot of news that came out of it. And the biggest news was that the Men's Division I Ice Hockey Committee favors using the NPI, the NCAA Power Index, to select the NCAA tournament field going forward. You had an opportunity to speak to the guy who's the brains behind the math for that. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, Tim Danahy, the name may be familiar to some, not to all, but what you might associate him with is the website he used to run college hockey stats, one of the more intelligent mathematical people around the game. But he's served as consultant to the NCAA and the committee for a number of years to kind of help put together what is a sensible selection criteria for the NCAA tournament. This has been called the PairWise for a long time. By changing it to the NCAA Power Index, the NPI, you've changed the name. That's one thing. There are some tweaks, and they're significant tweaks. We're going to see the elimination of multi-criteria. The NPI at the end of the day will deliver one number, and that one number is all you will need to know in terms of ranking the teams for at-large positions in the NCAA tournament. So you're not gonna have to worry about hearing about common opponent. You're gonna have to hear about head-to-head matchups. Those are all taken into consideration in the NPI. But, as Tim Danahy said, he gave a good example. He said, under the PairWise, you used to compare every single team against every other single team in the country. And you came out with 63 comparisons for each club. Winning a comparison would get you a point in the PairWise. Now, you looked at each of those comparisons, and usually they were pretty sensible. But the one we pointed out last year, Princeton from the ECAC they won their comparison against Ohio State. I'm taking his word for it. I didn't look this up before we got on the air, but he said, would you say that Princeton was the better team than Ohio State last year? The obvious answer is no. So did this ranking system kind of unfairly bump down Ohio State and maybe bump forward Princeton? So that's, I think, what the committee, the coaches, I don't even want to say coaches. I'm going to say committee because I don't want to speak for coaches, Derek. But what they want to try to simplify is just, eliminating the one team can have their entire tournament fate switched because of a single game, a head-to-head game that changes one matchup. You just won't have those extreme flips that we've had over the course of the lights of the PairWise. NPI, I think, simplifies things, but at the end of the day, I guess I should say, I still feel like this is going to feel like the PairWise when all is said and done, just with a new name.
Yeah, I think people are going to continue to call it PairWise.
They will.
Basically, we've been told it's better math, and that's what the whole thing goes. There's still a lot to be determined. This is just, they're going to use it. They're determined it. Coaches had questions. We discussed it in our league meetings. First time in Bonita Springs, coming from Naples all the years. It's a little bit north of Naples, south of Fort Myers. Beautiful property that we were at, but this was probably one of the bigger things that we talked about during this convention as far as a national. Every league goes in and they have some league issues they have to deal with. You meet as a league for a couple days, then you come to the national floor and then talk about things on the national level. But the NPI, it didn't sound like it was even up for discussion. It sounded like they were doing this and they just need people's input on the dials and where everything's gonna be put together on how much percentage goes into home wins versus road wins. I think the biggest fault in the PairWise, and I don't know the numbers, you got more credit for losing an overtime game on the road than the home team got for winning the overtime game. And that was one of the reasons that there was a problem with the shift of that. So I think that they're going to meet with the coaches again, talk about where they're going. I believe they're in the NCAA meetings right now, or maybe it was earlier this week, the committee meetings. And they're going to meet with the coaches, talk about the dials, and their goal is to have this all to the coaches finalized by the start of the season. They said end of August, really.
Well, when you talk about the dials, there are a lot of parameters that can be changed. And let me preface that by saying, if you've seen published from one of the various outlets anything that says this is what it would have looked like last year, that is not necessarily true. It's probably not true because they haven't decided what these dials, these parameters are going to be. And there's a bunch of them. One of them is how much is your winning percentage and how much is your strength of schedule. That could vary. There are going to be quality win bonuses. What's the multiplier? What level do you start getting a bonus? There's going to be a multiplier for home and away. And from what we've been told, that could even differ between conference games, non-conference games, and conference postseason games. And they've also got to decide how to count an overtime win and a loss. You mentioned about losing on the road being worth more. At first, it was 55-45 for the split. Then they went to basically 67-33. How that shakes out is another thing. So I have to think that they're going to present some things and maybe look at what it would have looked like last year. But there's a lot of stuff to fiddle with there. And I know that at USCHO, we've been running an NPI for D1 women and for D3 men and women. And so whatever numbers, whatever parameters they come up with, we're going to be able to plug in and do and have something to publish. But it should leave not much up to question when you see that number. It's the number, and that's what it is.
You know, the funny thing, you threw that out there. Sorry, Jimmy, but right now, there's a little bit of rumblings from the coaching body to go back to 5-on-5 overtime. Just a little bit, something to pay attention. It's not a rule change year, but this could be something moving forward, that there are some people that feel that we don't play enough games for the 3-on-3 overtime, and the overtime, they call it, is a gimmick. You play a 5-on-5 overtime, and if it's tied, you go to a shootout, and that's where it is. There is a little bit of rumblings about that, something to be aware of.
So if you go to a 5-on-5 overtime, any thought on that maybe being 10 minutes so that maybe you have enough time to settle it? Or is it a case of what we see with overtimes, especially in the playoffs? A lot of times it happens in the first couple of minutes.
I don't know. I'm not even getting into this. This is so, high in the sky that we're going to go back to 5-on-5 overtime. That's maybe something that's in there. Who cares? Like, just play and figure out. Like, both teams were on the ice. I get it that coaches don't like losing, but you can't protect yourself by losing by changing the parameters of the game continuously until you get it the way you like. I know that there's something to be said for there's not enough games played, but how many games is enough? Do you have to play exactly 82? Like, if it's 68, is that enough games? I know that 34 isn't going to get you there, but I just feel there's so much tinkering with a sport that's in one of its healthier states. I never understand why there's always so much tinkering.
See, I just threw you a complete curveball by throwing that in. You had no idea that was coming.
I did.
Jimmy goes on a rant. I love it.
Well, you talk about tinkering. That's what this NPI is supposed to stop, although they'll be turning dials from year to year, I'm sure, just like they've turned dials and added and taken out criteria in the PairWise and the RPI over the years.
Yeah, it doesn't stop that. It's like you're still going to have tons of tweaking, and when this team doesn't make it and they were eliminated, so now we won't have, 1/10,000th of a percentage point to do. Now it'll be something like a 10th of a percentage point or 100th of a percentage point. But the team that gets left out by the 100th of a percentage point, they're going to find a way to complain, and they'll want these criteria tweaks so that they could have made it. It's an evil pattern that you always want to perfect the system to favor you, and that's exactly what usually happens in these types of situations.
One good thing that came out of the playoffs this year in the NCAA that they were happy about is increased TV numbers. Just under 600,000 viewers watched the game between Western Michigan and BU for the national championship. That's up 30% from last year, but still over 40% down from the 2023 game. And regional attendance, there's been a drum beating again, as it does postseason every year, about going to on-campus sites. But the regional attendance was 84,744, which is the highest in the last 4 years. And it was only helped by a host in one regional, and that's Penn State. And there were some good numbers in the Thursday night UMass Minnesota game that had almost 140,000 viewers. So those are all good numbers and good things for the sport.
I think they're excellent things for the sport. And I do want to go back to, and I know I threw it in the rundown that, this year's game was still 40% below the 2023 championship game. That Minnesota Quinnipiac national championship game, I believe, was the highest rated all time. That's a very high bar to try to get back to. But great numbers, TV, and I think I think that we should every year be hearing less and less about going to campus sites because attendance at the regional the last couple of years has been pretty strong. This year, this is one of the strongest regional attendance years that I remember. And I was in Manchester, great atmosphere in that building for all of the games. It's a really oversized building, I think, for that event. But watching it on TV, every building looked like it had a good crowd, good electric atmosphere. So I feel like I get that there's a faction that really wants to get to campus sites, not always logistically the best solution. And I don't think that their case is held by strong regional attendance this season.
Well, David Carl, imagine this, brought it up to Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, who spoke to the coaches, who was a massive hockey fan, by the way. He knew that Hobart had won 3 straight national championships. He talked about hockey and knowing, watching Joe Britannia play way back when. But David Carl brought it up to Charlie Baker, and he goes, well, it sounds like a good idea to me. And then Steve Metcalf got up and went the other way of why we need to play regional sites. So, yeah, you would think that would go away, just like you talked about the 5-on-5 going away. It's not going to go away because people keep bringing it up.
Yeah, it will get talked about a lot. And by the way, I want to give credit to Charlie Baker, former Massachusetts governor. I'm very familiar with him. He's done a very good job, I think, leading the NCAA through the most challenging time it's ever been through. But to go down and kind of face the music, face the coaches, I think that's exactly what a president of the NCAA should be doing. Listen, that's a guy who was elected governor in Massachusetts, a very blue state. As a Republican, he was elected governor handily in a landslide. So he knows how to win people and influence people. He can win the room, and he knows what he's doing. I think that his presence, though, down at Bonita Springs, that was a good positive, I think, to the ice hockey body.
Well, we're going to take a break there and come back more from the coaches' convention and NCAA issues when USCHO Weekend Review continues.
I'm Cole Caulfield, and I played college hockey.
I'm Adam Fox, and I played college hockey.
I'm Jake Gensel, and I played college hockey.
I'm Cale McCarr, and I played college hockey.
Whether you are a fan or a player, nothing compares to college hockey.
We're back with USCHO Weekend Review. One of the things that coaches voted on at the convention is shortening the window in which players can enter the transfer portal. Right now, it's 45 days. In fact, it just ended on May 13th for this year. Coaches voted to have that go to 30 days. What's the thinking behind that, Derek? And how would that benefit everybody, possibly, by going to 30 days?
Well, basketball and football have already done it. So we're just kind of following the lead of basketball and football. Really, the reason that we're talking about doing it is the fact of you want to have it right when the regionals probably start or end, where it only really affects 4 teams, the teams that make the Frozen Four. Right now, it starts a little bit earlier, so it affects a few more than what we would like. But also, The bigger thing is people get, when they're on campus, you really like where you're at. You like your feeling of campus. Then you go home and you're away from campus, and then other people get in your head. And a lot of the coaches really want people to make those decisions while they're on campus, because, or have to face the music while they're on campus as well. So there's a lot of different factors behind it, but 45 days is a long time. I thought there was like 3 people maybe in the last week that went in the transfer portal. If you're going to go in, you're going to go in by now. You're going to go in right off the bat, and you very rarely see people go in at the end. So shortening it, I mean, obviously you could still take people out of the transfer portal. They could still go to different schools. It's just you can't enter the portal. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think you nailed that, Derek. 30 days is plenty. Make your decision. I think the players have plenty of control in this situation right now. So to take back a little bit, if you're the coaches, to take back a little bit of control, nothing wrong with that. I think we've said, I think basketball and football, they've already done this. They've shortened the window. But I think what you pointed out there, Derek, making sure that the window doesn't start until after the regionals is over is critical. I think you put teams in an unfair position. The 4 teams in the Frozen Four, sure, they might feel like they get behind the 8 ball a little bit in the portal, but they've also just reached the Frozen Four. I don't have as much sympathy for them, but I do kind of sympathize that the other 60 teams should kind of, see the portal starting at the same time. It shouldn't be during this tournament, during that tournament. I mean, you could have kids in concept entering during a league tournament. So I think that this makes tons of sense. I hope this goes through, but I think it's the most sensible approach to the portal.
Now we're still waiting for some final results from the House versus NCAA settlement. One of the things the judge did was send things back and say, what about grandfathering in players on programs that are going to cut rosters? And it seems like hockey is in a different situation than some other sports where they actually are having some rosters grow. The number that has been used is a roster limit of 26. And Derek, we've talked about that a lot. That's something that a lot of coaches don't like because it doesn't leave you a lot of room, especially when you get to goalie injuries. But it seems like coaches are assuming there are not going to be limits coming up for this coming season.
Well, if you read everything, and I followed it pretty closely, because obviously we had to decrease to 26. Our school is planning on opting in, and we had to decrease. I think what everybody's kind of looking at doing is, and we still don't know because they're going back and forth with different briefs. Everything looks to be grandfathering the current players in and cycling it out. I have no problem with the 26. I just have a problem with the way it was implemented, to have to immediately go right to it. If we can bring it at a slower pace, and if every player counts as what they're calling a DSA, designated student athlete, that they don't count, they're grandfathered in or they're exempt. I think that's a good way to go. And it would affect a whole bunch of players in our sport. And quite honestly, I hope we stay at 28. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see some teams at 26 right now that will increase their roster up to 28 or 29, and then gradually have to work its way back down.
This is a sensible approach, I think. I don't even know what the approach is though right now, Derek. That's the big problem. And you're getting too close to next season to potentially have this impact next season. I'm speaking as an outsider. You're a coach. You're living it. I don't think as a coach you want to be in a position where you're thinking, boy, what if I have to add? What if I have to cut? You want to know today what next season looks like. Last season is in the past, so let's look to next season. I want to see this applied practically. I think that this will, even if this is put in place, accepted, I think there's going to be room to change this in a couple of years because there'll be enough evidence that this is bad, this is working, this isn't. hope. So I think that's a big part. Now, I don't know, Derek, in any of the conversations that were had down in Bonita Springs, is that flexibility there that if we put these limitations in, can we change them in a few years?
We didn't even discuss it, quite honestly, because it's way, way, way above our pay grade. I think that people don't want it. Some do. Some carry 26. Some want to go a little bit higher. Some aren't going to opt in. But I think the feeling is eventually you're going to have to follow the rules. You may not opt in now, but eventually the Power Four conferences, they're going to have 65% of the voting power in the NCAA. And you're eventually going to have to follow their rules at some point. So we're going to have to work our way down and hope that somebody with that's a part of the Power Four sees that hockey is not at the right number eventually. So it wasn't even discussed because this is something that we can't really control. But you follow it and you read it, and the way it's being read and the way everybody's talking about right now is that there will be some sort of grandfathering going on.
But Derek, when you're looking at coaches right now, are coaches doing this with the assumption that this season there will be no limitation, or do you feel like, you're operating yourself? How are you operating right now?
Right now, I think that there's going to be some form of grandfathering in. I'm not sure what, I'm not sure how, but everything I've been told, I've talked to other coaches at Power Four schools, that there are probably going to be some sort of grandfathering in. And I read the briefs every day, and they're going to be, it'll be an interesting next couple of weeks, but I think it's going to eventually come through. I thought for a long time that we were going to be at 26, and it changed quickly.
So, Derek, I understand one other thing that was brought up by NCAA President Charlie Baker in his talk with all of you, news that there may come some more independence or more flexibility within the sport separate from the NCAA hierarchy in general. Is there something going on with that?
He talked about a new governance structure and some autonomy for each sport, but didn't really go into much. He said you're going to find out a lot more over the next coming weeks. It's like a wait and see. It was really neat that he was involved with us. It was a 90-minute conversation. He was supposed to be there in person, but he had a death in his family. So he was there via Zoom, and there were questions thrown. There was a panel of Guy Godowski was on the panel. It was moderated by the commissioner of the Big Ten in charge of hockey, Adam. I think that there was a lot of good things going on, but it's all kind of a wait and see. Once the House settlement passes or gets approved, then you're going to see a lot more happen.
I feel like if hockey does get autonomy, I'll believe it when I see it.
100%.
It's been talked about a lot. Now if it happens, wonderful. It certainly is a sport that deserves it, but I'll believe it when I see it.
Two of the commissioners who've been pushing it for years have been retired for a while now, so you can tell how far back it goes. Now, we mentioned this earlier on, a lot of talk about NCAA coaches being sought for NHL jobs. And two of them that came up were two very successful coaches, David Carl at Denver and Pat Ferschweiler at Western Michigan. Carl was very public about withdrawing his name from being in the running for the Chicago Blackhawks job, and University of Denver gave him what sounds like a really, really nice contract extension. Meanwhile, Pat Ferschweiler, there's a poison pill attached to his contract that has been made known in the press, a $2.3 million buyout, which even for an NHL club is a pretty big chunk of change. So what with these guys? Let's talk about David Carl first. He's made it very clear with a young family and a great situation in Denver, he's in no rush.
When I look at this and I sit there, and with David Carl particularly, I wonder how much he, wanted to make sure he got an interview or multiple interviews this year so that he could leverage it for a better contract. And obviously he got a great contract. The Pat Ferschweiler situation, that I think is becoming a more common approach in collegiate athletics, to build in some clauses that if you leave early in your contract, that the university will get some sort of financial remuneration. So It does make it a situation that makes it a little harder for NHL teams to go after these NCAA coaches. We're seeing more coaches get chances, though. Jim Montgomery, Jeff Blashill, David Quinn. I'm missing a bunch. Schools throw in a couple more names. There's a lot of guys are in and around the league that have been there in the last 10 years that come from the NCAA ranks. The money, very attractive. I've always said it, that job security, not.
And that's, I think, what it comes down to is I also think David might have been involved in Anaheim a little bit too, from what I've read. But we had heard that at the Frozen Four about the Pat Ferschweiler buyout. I think I told you that right after the championship. It's no secret. Pat Ferschweiler played with Keith Jones. Keith Jones is the president of the Flyers. I think he had a conversation or two with him where I was lucky enough to go to. There was a Western alum down in Bonita Springs that has involved in a really neat new restaurant. He had a thing for Western alums. We had Frank Serratore there who went to Western. Bernie Saunders, John Saunders' brother, was there from ESPN, and there were a lot of people there, but I think it was more of, hey, Pat just had a conversation with Philadelphia. And I think that does play into the fact, $2.4 million, whatever it is, that's a lot of money to buy out a coach.
When I look at it, schools, the only thing that ever is attractive is the money, right? Maybe not. I mean, people do want to coach the NHL, but I know that there's dream of playing at the NHL. I'm sure the coaching goes into that too, but you can do the math pretty quick. If you say, let's just use 3.5 million for a number, how many years, if that's a 1-year contract in the NHL, how many years of college do you need here? 5 NHL seasons, it might be 25 years it takes to get to that number if you're a well-paid college coach. So that's what always I think is the most attractive part. But I think that that's also the scariest part too, because you know that you're getting this money, but losing so much security. I'm glad to see college coaches wanting to find reasons to stay in the college game. There's something great about our sport that we have these relationships with these great coaches. And we don't want to lose them. When you have those personalities, you don't want to lose them to the next level.
I mean, you just threw out $3.5 million as a coach in the NHL. I don't know if I haven't heard of any coaches yet getting into the $1 million range in college hockey. So at very worst, you're getting a 3-for-1. At very worst, 3-for-1. Maybe even 4-for-1 potentially. That's it. Money and coaching in the NHL.
And knowing that you're going to be there maybe 2.5 years if you're lucky, the way they change things. But once you get into the whole roulette wheel there, I mean, it's like other things. It's like baseball managers. You mess up at one place, they hire you at another. A guy like Gene Mauch had a great mediocre career managing a whole bunch of baseball teams. And, I guess that's just the way it works. So once you get into the cycle, then maybe you're set. But are there some other things for us to watch this summer before we wrap up? NHL Draft, a couple of current college players are showing up high on prospect lists. James Hagens from Boston College, Logan Hensley from Wisconsin are among those. And certainly some juniors players, some national team development program players that are in that mix. That's always fun to watch.
Hagens is very interesting. He was predicted a season ago to be the number 1 overall pick, and it seemed consensus, let's say back in September. Played a season at Boston College, was good but not great, and he slipped. Now he's kind of penciled as the top 5, maybe could even slip out of that. He'll still go very high. He's still going to make great money, but there's a big difference between being Macklin Pellegrini lofted, the overall number 1 pick, and being, 5, 6, 7. So that'll be interesting to watch. I'm also interested, I used to be when I'd look at the draft, I would just cross out all of the CHL players because they were never playing college hockey. Now I'm kind of interested in some of these CHL players who are highly rated because of the fact that they could make a decision at any point to change their commit and go to college.
Things that I would be looking at, I think the house settlement, obviously. I think you're going to see I think there are a lot of players out there that are committed from major junior that aren't going to see where they get drafted first, deciding if they're going to come to college or not, talking to their NHL teams. I still think there's a pocket of people that are out there that might be doing that. I think you're going to see some surprises that are going to come to college hockey. You're already seeing some top ones going to Michigan or some of the Big Ten schools. I still think there's a lot more at play recruiting wise. I think it's right now upwards of like 130 committed CHL players to colleges. I think you're going to probably see a good number more potentially after the draft, depending on where kids get drafted. That's something to watch. And still, the house settlements are going to be still something that everybody in all sports need to watch.
Is it possible we'll see a significant number of players from the CHL not be able to get into college because they weren't planning on it academically?
That's possible. We've already dealt with a couple that we've talked to eventually that did not have the right grades, and there's no way to go about it. Paul from the NCAA Eligibility Center went and spoke to all the teams in all the league meetings and answered questions about this. So I think that there's a lot. I think one of the things that you're also going to see is you're going to see some guys that played some games of professional hockey, playing college hockey, whether they signed an ATO or a PTO where they didn't get paid above actual and necessary expenses. You might see some guys that have played 3 to 4 games in the East Coast League or 3 to 4 games in the American League back in college hockey. I think that's going to be something that people are going to have to really wrap their head around a little bit.
No more coaching vacancies unless somebody decides late in the summer to retire, or those have all been filled fairly quickly.
There's always
do we expect
one, though.
Anything?
There's always one. I don't know who it is, but there's always one out there that pops in late. And I think you're seeing the coach in waiting right now a little bit because you don't want to lose players to the transfer portal and trying to find out ways to do it. I mean, obviously, Ed, I told you all year, watch what's going on at RIT, and you kept saying, nope. And I kept saying, watch out. And who was right?
Yeah, and like I told you, you college hockey coaches spread rumors like 7th grade girls. So I guess I should believe you next time you've got a juicy rumor.
Yeah.
And I told a few coaches that too, and most of them laughed and agreed. So what are you going to do?
The funny thing about that, and I think that's the way you're seeing it, you're seeing the coach in waiting, and you're seeing a private hire. I mean, RIT basically at the end of the day waited until they had another coach so that there was not a mass exodus of players. And they still lost 2 players after that with the new coach. So I think that there's right now you may see one more, but then that opens up a 30-day window for people to go in the transfer portal if somebody leaves.
Yeah, and I think the players that left were going to be leaving anyway. I don't think the coaching change impacted that probably at all in that situation, but certainly that is the concern. And I mean, at Mercyhurst, you already have a coach with the title on their website, head coach in waiting. He literally is the title on the website. So in waiting is correct. It doesn't say heir apparent.
We've lost 6 good coaches to retirement this year throughout college hockey, and 6 outstanding people. I was fortunate enough to work for Mike Schaefer. He had a little get together in Bonita Springs with all the people that worked for him. You had Mike Schaefer, you had Jeff Jackson, Brian Riley. Who else am I missing? George Roll, retired, former Clarkson coach. That's 4. Who else am I missing here? Wayne, that's 5, and
Jack Arena.
Bob Daniels.
So we got 7 if we throw in Jack Arena after 42 years in Division III.
Yeah.
And
so, I mean, there's
Rick will go next year, Rick Godkin.
I mean, it's changing. The old guard is changing, and I'm going to be fortunate. We'll get Brock Sheehan at Notre Dame this year at a very early stage in his head coaching career. So hopefully he gets a win before he plays us.
Well, with that, we'll wrap up this special spring edition. I guess we'll call it a spring edition of Weekend Review. Maybe we'll hop on later in the summer if there's enough news. If not, we'll see you back here in the fall. For Jim Connelly, for Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Weekend Review.